Hello, thanks for joining the SI recording from September 30th. What I'll be talking about today are for loops, specifically nested for loops, then a bit about do while loops. We'll do an activity on when to use each loop, and then loop coding challenge activity. So enjoy and send me a message if you have any questions on any of the content that was covered today. As I was talking about, nested loops can be one loop within another loop. It can be for loops, it can be do while loops, it can be while loops, it can be a mix of all three. Basically, it means any loop which is nested inside of another one. Okay, so they can be useful when two values need to change, when you're taking input for like a while loop and you're assessing if that input is valid, and then maybe you want to do like a loop with that input, it could be helpful. Nested loops are made up of an inner loop and an outer loop. So the outer loop is just the one on the outside, and the inner loop is the one on the inside. The inner one is indented, so that's how you can tell the difference. And you can actually nest even more than two loops in each other. You can nest 5 loops inside of each other. There's no limit to how many you can nest, but generally we have an inner and an outer. Otherwise, we can actually have more as well. So starting off, nested loops are very confusing. So I want to go through step by step how we can look at them. So let's take a look at this. So I have a nested for loop here. These are probably the most complicated of the nested loops. And I want to know how many times does the, hang on, wait. Go away. I did this myself. Please go away. There we go. No one saw it. Okay, so how many times does the inner loop iterate? You guys just saw that it was 6, but I want to talk about why. So to find how many times the inner loop iterates is actually really, really simple. All we got to do is address the inner loop and the outer loop separately. So first I want to address the outer loop. So if I scribble this out here, how many times does the outer loop iterate?
3.
3, right? And now I want to look at just the inner loop. Outer loop doesn't exist now. How many times does the inner loop iterate?
2.
2. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 3 times 2 equals 6. And this is how many times the inner loop is going to iterate using both loops. So we can say the inner loop iterates 6 times. And then the outer loop, well, we just found out that the outer loop iterates 3 times. We just talked about that. So the outer loop iterates 3 times. All right, come back here. There we go. Okay, so now finding the output is a little bit more tricky than when Ed asks for how many times it iterates. When it iterates, you guys are all good. But when he asks for the output is when things get a little bit complicated. So running in REPL is very handy, but if you are on a test, that's not going to work out too well for you. So I want to show you how we can look at these loops, and it's going to be just like our while loops, but a bit more complicated. So starting off, we are our compiler and we're going down our program. And then all of a sudden we see a for loop and we know, okay, this is a loop that runs a specific number of times. And then we are going to initialize our loop variable, which is in this case, j to 0. And then the compiler is going to say, okay, I know what j is. J is now assigned with 0. So it then tests for the condition. So it says, is 0 less than 3? And this checks out. So perfect. But we aren't going to do this part yet. This is not yet. So we do initialization, and then we check for the condition. And then actually, we are going to go to whatever happens next. This part, we don't do it yet. So this is not yet. All right. So this checked out. 0 was indeed less than 3. So we are going to do as if we normally would for a loop. We are going to check whatever comes next. And what comes next happens to be another for loop. And now we can say for our first iteration, j was 0. So now we are going to check our inner for loop. And for our inner for loop, we have a new variable. It's I. And I, we are assigning with 0. And then we say, is 0 less than 2? This says checks out. And then we can say that I right here is 0. And now we're not going to do our I++ yet, but instead, we are going to execute this cout statement. And then we cout I and j. And then j, we know over here had a value of 0. So we're going to say 0. And then we're going to check what's our value for I. We have our little nice handy chart here. Also 0. And then we are going to increment I because we've hit the end of the for loop. Next, we go here. It's a little bit tricky. So the steps are initialize, check condition, body, increment. All right, so now we are going to increment I. I is now 1. We check our condition is 1 less than 2. It is. That means that we are going to go down here and do our cout statement again. So now we have J is still 0. We haven't done anything with J yet. And then we go 1. Next, we're going to increment that I again. We have I plus plus. I is now 2. We are going to check is 2 greater, less than 2. This is not true. So now we've reached the end of the for loop because this condition fails. And then what we have to do is whatever comes next. And whatever comes next is this ending brace. Well, since this brace is connected to a loop brace, we have these two braces here, which are connected with each other. We're going to go all the way back up to the top here. And I'm going to erase some of the stuff so we can see what's happening now. So we just went through our first outer loop iteration and our first inner loop iteration. So now we got to do the whole thing over again because it's a loop and it's very exciting. So now we have J is, we're going to do our J plus plus now. So here's where a J plus plus comes in. So we're going to do J plus plus. So this is J is now 1. 1 is less than 3. So now we go to the for loop here. And then we say, all right, now we start all the way from scratch again. We're going to say I is assigned with 0. And now we say 0 less than 2, checks out. And then we're going to say our cout statement comes next. And we're going to print our J value, which is now 1, and our I value, which is now 0. And then we go again and we check it again. We say, okay, is 1 less than 2? Yes. And now we're going to do J, which was 1, and I, which was 1. And then we are going to increment for I again. I plus 1, 1 plus 1 is 2. Is 2 less than 2? No, it's not. And then we are going to go exit the for loop. Then we're going to go and redo the outer loop again. So it's a very tedious process, as you can see, but we are almost done. So next we have the outer loop is going to increment for J because we have just reached the beginning of it again. Oh, now J is 2, and then we're going to go back down to the inner loop, and the inner loop is going to get executed once more, and you probably see a pattern with the outputs now, so you could kind of figure them out. Filling these in. Okay, so now is 0 greater than 2, less than 2? It is. And then we're going to cout J, which is now 2. So 2, 0. And then we're going to redo our for loop and then increment I. And then we have 1 for I. And then we're going to do JI, 2, 1. And then we are going to increment I one more time. And then I is now 2. And then we say is 2 greater than 2? It is not. And then we exit our for loop because our condition is false, all the way back up to the top where we increment J. So we're going to increment J, and J we had with a value of 2. 2 plus 1 is 3. And then we say is 3 greater than 3? And then we say this is false. And since this is false, now we got to go all the way down and exit it. We're not going to do the inner loop anymore because the inner loop can only happen if the condition in the outer loop is true. So then we have all of that mess resulted in an output here, which we are going to test. So I'm going to remove all of these scribbles. I should clear everything. We have 0s and 1s and 2s, and let's see if that was actually correct. So we did it step by step, all the way through all the iterations. And now let's run it. Let's see if what we came up with was actually true. And we can see that using the code in REPL. So here is the REPL with the same exact code that we just ran through on our own. And if we run it, Well, REPL did it a lot faster than us. That was very good of REPL. It's a computer. It can compute a lot faster than I can, but we did get the same output. So that is how you could run through a for loop on an exam. I don't know if he will have for loops on the next exam, but this is just a hint of what you can do with it. You can make like a box for your output and then a box for your J values and your I values. So you really should do a good job of keeping track of your J and your I, because if you lose those values, well, then you're kind of screwed, because if you lose those values, you are going to get incorrect answers. So keep track of those values. And notice that I want you guys to really pay attention that when I was doing the inner for loop, I went and did the inner for loop as normal. I didn't say, okay, we did our inner for loop once. Now I'm going to go do my outer for loop. No, we did the inner for loop until the condition resulted in false. We kept running through it just as we would normally, as if this outer for loop wasn't even here. And then as soon as it's false, then we go back up to the top. And that's the only time we go back up to the top, when this guy turns false. All right.
Okay.
Questions on all of that? I know it's a bit long and
So you
confusing.
complete the inside for loop first, and then you can go back out, right?
Yes.
Well,
So
to
we pretend
the
that this
outer
outer
one.
for loop
Yeah.
isn't even here when we are running the inner for loop. This isn't here. We're
Yeah.
going to just pretend that this inner for loop is working as normal. We run through it over and over and over again until this test condition is false. That's the only time that we exit this for loop.
Okay.
And then, and only then, is when you're going to come back and exit this loop for one. And then you're going to see what's the next statement. Well, in this program, the next statement is this ending curly brace. And we know that this curly brace connects to this curly brace. And that is why we go back up here. Sound good?
Yep.
Any other questions? I know that was a bit confusing, but we're going to see it in programs and work through it. Hopefully it will make a bit more sense. So that is how the for loops, the nested ones, are going to iterate. So you kind of know what's happening now. So I have gotten a ton of questions on challenge activity 6.4.2. People who are here, do you guys have questions on this particular challenge activity? Because I am willing to work through it step by step, how we would solve this problem. If you guys don't have questions on this one and already did it, I will move on to something new.
What
do
does
we
this
think?
one look like?
This one is, let me open Zybooks. So 6.4.2 is this guy. We are going to iterate for rows and columns,
Yeah,
and we're going to
I'm-
print the rows and the columns and use a nested for loop to do this.
I'm stuck on this one.
You are stuck on this one. Let's do it. I'm going to just work through it here. So if I'm going to solve a problem like this, the first thing I'm going to look at is in the example output, are there any patterns? And I can see that we have letters and we have numbers. One is incrementing faster than the other. So which is incrementing faster? I just want you to notice this. Well, the letters are changing faster. We go to A to B to C, whereas for the numbers, we are 1, 1, 1. So that should give us a little bit of a hint. So the hint that it's giving us is, remember how I was talking about how many times does each loop iterate? Well, the inner loop iterates 6 times. It's iterating more. Well, the inner loop should give us a hint that we want to take care of the letters in the inner loop because they're changing faster. So maybe what I want to do here is just create one for loop. I don't want to create 2 yet because 2 is complicated. But what I can do is I could do a for loop. If I could spell for. And yes, this sign was 0 because we normally start out as 0. And we're going to say it's less than something. I'm going to fill this in later. And then we normally do I++. So this is our basic for loop structure most of the time. For different problems, it can look different. So I want to first do the letters. That's what I want to do first. And I know that the letters have to do with the columns. So I want to do I is less than the number of columns. So we have the columns are getting inputted into the number of columns. And I'm going to just say while we are less than the max number of columns. So columns are lettered, rows are numbered. So next, all I want to do is print out some letters just to get started on this. So I want to use incremental development. So instead of all the way from the beginning doing this, because this is complicated, I don't know how to do this. What I can do is I can print out 3 letters. So I want to print out a letter, and I'm going to create a variable for that letter, which it looks like Zybooks has already created for me. It's created a variable called current column letter. And I know that I want to start at A. So I'm going to go ahead and assign this current column letter with A here. And then I want to print it. That's all I want to do. That's all I'm going to do so far. I'm going to print out current column letter, the amount of times that we are, the amount of columns that we have. So if I gave it a value for rows and a value for columns, now I have 3 columns. So next, if we take a look at our example output, we don't want just A's, we want A, B, C. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to increment current column letter as well. So how do you guys think that I could increment current column letter so that just for this for loop, forget all this, but just for this for loop, it prints A, B, C.
Are they trying to solve this one?
Current column letter equals current column letter plus 1.
Okay, that sounds good to me. So I could do that right here. I'm going to say current column letter is assigned with, so incrementing it here by 1. Now let's see what happens. There we go, ABC, perfect. We have a start to this problem now. So next we can see, all right, I don't want ABC to just print once. I wanted to print the number of row times. So we have the rows are assigned with 2. And we can see that ABC, it's printing twice. So that should give us a hint that now we want to do something with rows. So how could we make this entire statement right here iterate twice?
Create the outer for loop.
Yeah, we're going to create an outer for loop because all a for loop does is create a specific number of iterations for what's inside. So I'm going to take all of this because we already have this working and put it inside here. And I'm going to make sure to indent it so we can tell the difference between the inner and the outer for loop and fix my braces. All right, so now we have a conditional statement. So I'm going to start with J. J is 0. And then we're going to say J is less than something. And then we're going to do J plus plus because that's going to iterate for a for loop. So what should J be less than? So this runs for the example inputs 2 and 3 2 times. What do we think that J should be less than?
3.
J could be less than 3. That is really good. We do want to make sure that no matter what input they enter, the program still runs. So they're entering inputs into these CN statements. We have CN num rows and CN num columns. So if they were to enter some input for num rows and num columns, we want this program to work for any inputs. So what do you think we could put here so that
Num
this
rows.
Yes, we are going to put num rows here. So num rows. So it's going to iterate this entire thing num rows times. And now let's take a look at what happens. So if I said that rows are 2, as we have in our example, and columns are 3, we have ABC, ABC. So now we're getting closer. So with each step, we are getting closer and closer and closer. Notice how I'm continuing to run this to verify that each step is working. Writing all this at once is going to be very complicated. But what you can do is break this problem up into smaller steps and notice patterns in the output so you can create this larger program. All right, so we have a little bit more to do. Next, I noticed that we have spaces. We have a space after each letter. And this is pretty simple. All I can do is go down to my cout statement where I'm printing the letter, and I can just add a space after it. And let's try it again. And I do 2, and I do 3. And look at that, we have spaces after each letter. We are even closer now. So the last thing that we want to do is add in these numbers. And numbers are the number of rows. And we actually already have a variable for rows here. We have a loop that's already taking care of this. So what could I put here so that I get the numbers 1 for A, B, and C, and then 2 for the second section of A, B, and C? What could I put in the cout statement?
Number of rows?
I could put number of rows. Let's see what happens when I put number of rows, because it's really good to have ideas and test them out. Because that's what's great about programming. We can test different things out and see what works and what doesn't. All right, so now we only have 2s. We have half of it right and half of it incorrect. So we are 50% there. So the reason why it's 2 is we got input for num rows here, and num rows got assigned with 2. So num rows technically isn't changing, which is why we're seeing 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. All right, Leah says J. I think that sounds pretty good because J is an increment variable. We know that it's going to change because we have this increment operator. So with every time that this outer for loop iterates, the value of J is going to increase by 1. So we know it's definitely going to change now. Let's take a look. So we do 2 and we do 3. Oh, cool. We have changing variables now. We could say, well, what if we do J equals 1? So where are you thinking that we should put this? J is assigned with 1. Where could it go? Here?
Yes.
You want to change it here?
Don't add the other right there.
And then change this to less than or equal to num rows. So then we can get all the way up to 2. All right, let's give it a shot. So we do 2 rows, 3 columns. Look at that. We have our desired output. Let's see if it works with bigger numbers. So if we say we want 4 rows and 5 columns, check that out. We are getting all the way to E and all the way to 4. That sounds pretty good to me. And there are other ways to do this, always. There are many solutions to every single coding problem. Instead of setting this equal to 1 here, we could have kept this like this and then just added 1 to J because we were getting 0 and 1. And then if we tried this again, we're adding 1 to J in the output. We're not reinitializing it. We could say 2 rows, 3 columns, same thing. So there's so many different solutions to this. This is not the only one, so I don't want you guys to start thinking that. So if you have a different solution than this, yours is completely valid, but this is how I would go about solving it step by step and doing little pieces at a time and slowly working to a full program like that.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Did this help?
A lot, yes.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. So, you know what we can do? We can verify this. We can take this into zyBooks, and I can come down here and paste it, and let's check and see if it runs. So one thing that you guys may notice is you had extra variables here that I technically didn't use. Basically, they were creating something for I and J instead of using I and J. I personally like to use I and J because I know what I and J are doing and I'm familiar with it. In every loop I've been using I and J, but technically they would have wanted you to use like num rows for J and num columns for I, but it works either way. So we have passed with all tests. Perfect. Everybody good with this? Any questions on what I just did here? All right. Well, if there are no questions, there is how you'd work through this problem. All right. So next up, what do I have for you guys? What time is it? Oh, cool. I still have a half hour. I want to do another for loop program. All right. I want to do this one. This is one that I've created for you. And basically what it's going to do is it's going to do something very similar to zyBooks, but it's going to get more interesting. So this is going to help you with your zyBook assignment as well. So what I want to do is I want to enter a value and print from 0 up to that value, incrementing the number of spaces each time. But then what I want to do is I want to add another for loop to make it go back and forth like a zigzag. like this, all the way down the console. And then I want that zigzag to repeat a number of times. So it's basically this huge zigzag that flows back and forth on your console. It's gonna look really cool. So to start out, how many people completed challenge activities zyBooks 4, basically the one above this with the spaces? Did anyone not finish this or needs help on it? Because I'm basically going to take this and make it a little bit more complicated. What do you think? Everybody good with this one? Where is my chat? I should get that back.
No, I didn't do that one yet, but
You have not done this one yet. Okay. So do you guys want to work through this one step by step or just take the final output and mess with it from there? What do you think? All right, I am going to try doing this one step by step. This one's a bit more complicated, at least to me, than the previous one. So let's give it a go. So I'm going to copy the instructions here, take them to REPL, another comment, so we can just code below this. And we want to basically do this. We want to take an input for a number and then take that number and start at 0 all the way up to that number and increase the amount of spaces every single time. So we're going to look at this again for patterns. The pattern that I'm seeing here is your spaces are incrementing a lot faster than your numbers are. So we have a space, a space, a space, a space, a space, a number. A space, a space, a space, a space, a space, 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 number. Space, a space, a space, a space, a number. So that should hint to you spaces probably going to go in the inner loop because we know for a fact that we are using a nested for loop because zyBook is telling us that there's I and J. So we are using a nested for loop here. And we know that the inner loop is going to increment so much faster. It's going to keep going faster, 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 and then the outer loop. Faster, 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 outer loop. Okay. So let's start off with our inner for loop again. So we are going to do 4. And then we're going to do I is 0. I is less than a certain value. Here's our basic for loop structure. We don't know quite yet what's going to go here, but I do know that I'm going to want to print a space because I saw in this pattern, spaces are going a lot faster. So I can just use a string to do that. And I'm going to just throw in any value here for now, and I'll come back and change it as soon as I figure out what that's going to be. So I'm going to just make sure it compiles. It does. We got 6 spaces printed out here. So that is going to be the very start. And now we're going to develop this even further. So now I'm going to look closely at my instructions here. So I see that usernum definitely appears in the instructions, which means that I need to use it in my program. But first I need to figure out what exactly usernum is doing. So I can see that we are going to print numbers from 0 all the way to usernum. And the number of spaces which appears before the number, that is also going to relate to usernum. So I should keep that in mind, that usernum is going to be the max number. So if I create my outer for loop right here, like I'm doing, I'm going to think about usernum and how many times do I want that outer for loop to iterate. What is J going to be less than? If we take a look at this, we know that we want J to be same as these values. And we know that these values, the maximum is usernum. So maybe usernum. Usernum might be a good test. So J is less than usernum. And then when J is less than usernum, we're going to go do this inner for loop in increment. And we have this random 6 here. I don't think we want 6 because we don't want to hard code anything. We never want to use a hard coding for something that's going to import values. So when do we want to print a space? Do you see any pattern here of when we want to print a space? I think that we might want to print a space while I is less than the value of J. So while we are less than 2, we're going to want to print a space. If we're still less than 2, we're going to want to print another space. And once we get greater than 2, we don't want to print a space anymore. We want to print 2. So we could say while I is less than J, because J is taking care of our numbers I is taking care of our spaces. And now let's take a look what this does. Well, it did something. Not quite what we wanted it to do. But we have spaces here. So next, we know that we want to print this number. So we have the spaces. But next, we want to print these numbers at the end. So where do you think that we can print this number so that it prints after the spaces are finished iterating? So once this for loop that's taking care of the spaces is done, and it says, okay, I'm less than j now, I want to print a number. Next, we are going to print the number. We're going to do what it asks. So to print the number, we could do a cout statement here. J. And let's think about this. After j, we're not going to want to print off over here. We want to print to the next line. So we print j, and then we're going to go down to the next line, then start spaces again. Then we're going to print j, next line, start spaces again, which hints we're going to use an end line. So now let's give it a go. Well, look at that. Just like that, we started at 0 and got to 14. Oh no, I wanted 15. How could we make this so this program prints to 15 instead of 14? Because user num was 15. So I technically want from 0 to 15 to get printed here. How could I do that? Any ideas?
You could do a +1 or add an equals after the.
Add an equals right here?
Yeah.
Yeah, that way we say while j is less than or equal to user num, that way it includes that 15. We can go all the way down to 15 just like that.
You could also have added a +1 to user num, right?
+1 to user num. Let's give it a go.
Well, without the
About
equal.
this is we can test it. And I think that sounds pretty good to me. Yeah. Like I said, so many ways to do this. Not the only solution. So let's keep this one. This one's kind of interesting. So now we have a line of numbers going diagonally. So that takes care of my first step that I have for you guys here. Next, what I want to do is actually take this line of numbers and make it go the opposite direction afterwards. So I want it to go from 15 all the way back down to 1. So like decreasing. How do you guys think that we could do that? So we did this, that's done. Now I want to add another nested loop below the first one to, instead of printing increasing spaces, to print decreasing spaces. Inverse. All right, so let's copy this and let's work off of it because we know that this is already doing basically what it's supposed to do, but like the opposite. So what do you guys think that we could do with this? Make it go the opposite.
Can we set
direction.
j equal to our final value, which is what, user num or something?
User num, and then
we need a decrease instead of plus plus.
so
We just need to flip
decrease,
everything around. Ooh, this is bad.
decrease, and then j is less than what now? Or is j greater than or equal to 0? What do we think now? Let's give it a run and see what happens. Oh, look at that. Look how simple that was to change the direction. All we had to do is change one test condition, and now we've changed the entire direction of this. So look at that. That is very cool. So now what I want to do is I want this to print again and again and again. So we have zigzags going all the way down the console. So what do you guys think I could do so that this whole section of code right here doesn't just print once, but I want it to print 5 times. Let's just say 5 times. What could I do?
A while loop.
I could do a while loop. So let's work on a while loop. So we have our while, we have our conditions, and we have our braces. I'm going to take this and put it inside the while. There we go. And what do you think our while test condition should be? Well, I think I need to create a variable to hold the number of iterations. I'm going to just call that num, and I'll start it out as 0. And then I could say num is something, and then when num is that something, it's going to run 5 times. So what test condition could I use here? Well, I could check if num is less than 5. What do you think, Ricky? Do you think this would work? So we start out at 0. While num is less than 5, we're going to do this.
Would num less than user num be possible?
User num is 15. So 15 is just the number of numbers that we're getting outputted here. We could do 15.
Mhm.
We could do 15 iterations. That is totally a valid thing to do. It's like that.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure.
Yeah, no worries. All right, let's give it a go. Let's see. Oh boy. Well, look at this. We got an infinite loop, which actually looks really cool right now.
Yes,
Like
Maybe we do
normal.
have a purpose for infinite loops all of a sudden. So we have an infinite loop. This is very exciting. It looks amazing on my console, probably better than my output that I was expecting. But technically, we're not supposed to get an infinite loop. We want this to print 15 times. So why did we get an infinite loop? Well, this test condition that I have right here is always true, no matter what. And the reason being, num is always 0. We never change the value of num, which means that as long as num is 0, which it always is, this is going to run. So we got to change the value of num. We could do like a reassignment statement. So you could do num plus plus. So we can add 1 to num every single time. Let's check that out. Oh, look at that. It's not an infinite loop anymore because we updated the value of num. So then at some point, we are going to get to when this is 15, greater than 15, and therefore false. All right. So I do want you guys to notice something right here. We have a incrementing statement. We have a test condition, and we have a variable declaration. This should remind you of something. This should remind you of a for loop. We have all 3 of those conditions right there in the braces. So normally, when we want to increment something a specified number of times or iterate a specified number of times, we want to actually use a for loop because it's all nice and contained right there. So instead of while, which is a totally valid thing to do, as you saw, it works. But I want to try using a for loop. So I could do for, and then I'm going to create an int variable named k, assign it with 0, and then I'm going to say while k is less than user num, and I'm going to do k plus plus. And I'm going to remove this num. I am going to remove this num. And take a look at this. I'm going to also clear this. Clear. Okay. And I'm going to run it and return. Nope, that's not it. This one works. Look at that. We have 15 of these zigzags going back and forth. That's pretty cool. All right. So I think that worked exactly as I expected it to. So do you guys have any questions on this one? Nope, not that.
Have you ever done like a Pascal's triangle?
No, I haven't.
No.
Wait, what even is that? Please, if someone who knows math, help me. I'm assuming this is math.
It's like it kind of like if you were like multiplying binomials, like if it was like x
Okay.
plus b to the 20th power or whatever, you
Mhm.
can like the way they first found out is they made this like triangle where it'll be at the top of the triangle, it'll be like 1 and 1, and then below it you have 1, 2, 1. Yeah, that's way better. Just look at it.
Oh, wait, I have seen this before.
Yeah, I'm sure you have.
I have. All right. Yeah, this looks really cool. I totally bet you that there is a loop for this. I don't know it off the top of my head, but it would definitely be a fun coding project. Maybe I'll make it an SI project for next week or something. I will save this and look into it and see if I can figure out a loop for this, because that looks really interesting. And I bet you're totally right. I bet that's a nested loop thing. So that's really cool. All right. So now we have our really cool zigzags here, which are definitely useful. One thing that's kind of fun. I'm technically not in charge of extra credit. I'm sorry. I can ask Ed. You know what I can do? I can ask Ed, say, hey, there's a project that I think would be fun for them. Maybe they could get an extra credit point for finishing it. So I will talk to Ed about that. All right. So that is this. One thing that's kind of fun is you could actually replace this instead of saying J. Wait, is this what I'm thinking? Yeah, I could say, look at what I could do. Instead of saying J, instead of printing the number, I could say, and then instead of J, instead of printing numbers, I'm going to print hello. And check this out. This is something fun you can send to annoy your friends. I do this. When I first made this program, I send it to people and annoy them. Look at that. You can copy this and send it to people. It's very fun. So you could just replace hello with a variable or different strings, and it's a fun little project. All right, so do while. I want to go over those really quickly. So a do while is very similar to a while loop. It's going to just do something while something is true, but instead of checking for the condition at the very top of it, it's going to do something. So this is always going to happen. And then it's going to check. And then if it's true, then we're going to go and do something, then check. And then do something, and then check. And if it checks false, we're going to move out. So it's very similar to while. I don't want to spend too much time on those because I think the majority of you guys that I've talked to have gotten this one. But one thing that's important to note is with do while, this loop is always going to run at least once because there's no condition here. So it's going to just say, okay, cool, I see a do. I don't see any condition to check for. And it's going to say, okay, I can run this. And even if this is false, it's already run it. So always going to run at least once. All right, so what is the difference between these loops? We've learned 3 of them. Well, very handy. The developers of C++ decided to name them actually pretty well. So you can take a look at this. A while loop runs while something is true. A for loop runs for a specified number of predetermined iterations. And a do while, it's going to do something. And then it's going to loop while the condition is true. So this is how you can memorize the difference for them. And I think I have, okay. A loop runs some code, then checks if the user wants to repeat the loop statements. Do you want another order? So what loop should I run? What loop should I use for this? So it's going to check if the user wants to repeat the loop, and it's going to say, do you want another order?
While?
Yeah, I think we could use while for that. There we go. Please do it now. Oh, never mind, I'll fix it later. Okay, a loop runs through a set of data where we know how much data there is to analyze. And then that loop checks each piece of data to see if it meets a predetermined specification. So we know how much data there is, and we're going to loop through all of it. What do we think?
4.
For
Yeah, it's going to
loop.
be a 4 because we do know how many loops we want. We know it's going to be the number of, well, basically how much data we have. So if we had several strings, we can loop through each string. All right, and loop runs while a user enters a specific value. If they enter the incorrect value, the loop should not enter at all. What do
While?
we think? Yeah, it's going to be another while. So I guess I didn't put a do while here. Sorry, guys. But yeah, you guys got all of these correct. Good job. And you can come back to this if you forget which is which. Hopefully that's a little bit helpful. All right, so now we have 10 minutes or so left. We could do loop debugging, where I have some loops that I messed up on, and I'm going to have you guys tell me what I did wrong and we'll correct them. Or we could do a coding challenge, which I'm going to actually show you what it looks like so you guys can see what I did and hopefully not show you too much of the code. So basically what I have here is you enter your full name. And then it wants you to enter a password. It's basically like a website asking for your name and your password, so I can give it a password. And I want to enter that password, and I want it to meet these specifications. I want it to be at least 8 characters long, contains at least 1 number, contains at least 1 capital letter, and contains at least 1 special character. So what I'm going to have you guys do is assess the user password and say, hey, did they meet all these specifications? Is it over 8 characters? Does it have a special character? Does it contain a capital letter? And does it contain numbers? And if so, welcome them to the website. So we could do that, or we could do loop debugging. So you guys can vote in chat or just tell me which one sounds more interesting or useful to you guys. What would be more helpful?
The password challenge.
Passwords? All right, let's look at some passwords because that sounds actually pretty interesting. If we run out of time, we will continue this on Tuesday. That'll be the first thing we do. So this is, I have some stuff here so it doesn't take a million years for us to type. It's basically just cout statements. So I have started out with a constant string, which just holds the special characters that I want us to assess for, a string that contains the username, a string for the password. This is just like the cout statements that you saw with the previous example. But the first thing I want you guys to do is use some sort of input statement to get the user's full name, including spaces. Notice how I enter my full name, last name, first name, and it got both of them. So how could I do that?
Get line.
Get line. That is the correct answer. And then we do cin, and then we give it the variable we want to use, and I want to use username. Great. So now we can put a semicolon at the end, verify that it works. I'm going to just give it 2 letters, space, and it welcomes me to the website. So I just have that username pop up again, so it's kind of more friendly to the user and personalized. What I want you guys to do now is get password input without spaces, and no spaces allowed in this one. What could I do?
CN.
CN. Perfect. Good job. User password. And I have the crocodiles going the wrong way. And it all compiles. Perfect. So now our next step, this is like the huge part of this program, is to check if our user password meets the specifications that I've listed here. So first, we want to check if the password is at least 8 characters long, 8 or more. How could I do that?
Dot size.
Yeah, if. So I'm going to say if, then I'm going to look at our password. User password dot size is greater than or equal to 8. So next, what am I going to do in here? What could I do that says if this is true, then we know that the first specification is true? A little bit of a tricky one. It actually took me some time to figure out. What I ended up coming up with is actually using Booleans. It's been a little bit since we used those. So bool, and I want to say valid password. I'm going to just say bool valid. So basically I want to say if it is greater than or equal to 8, valid is going to be true. So thus far, password is valid. And I want to actually initialize it to false. So that way we don't get anything weird happening. So then if it's valid, so we can say if valid, this is going to only happen if this was valid. We're going to do this. So if it's valid, we want to check if it contains at least 1 number. How could we check if our string contains a number?
Would we do a for loop that checks every character at index I?
Yeah, that sounds really good to me. So we could check a for loop because we can run through every single part of the password. So we say unsigned, I is 0. And then we say I is less than user password, password dot size. And then we're going to do I++. So that is our basic for loop syntax when we are iterating through strings. So next, what do we want to do? Well, next we want to see if index at I is a number. So we could do that using an if statement because we're checking if something is true or not. We could say if user password dot at I is, what could I use here to check if it's a number? Well, I could compare it to existing numbers. I can compare it to if it's greater than or equal to the character 0. So this is different than the number 0. It's very important. And then I could say and user password dot at I have the chat in the way, so I can't see what I'm doing. There we go. Is less than or equal of what? What do I want to check now? What is this going to be? Yeah, it's going to be 9. So if it's this and this, then we could say that, well, it's true now. We have a valid ID is now true. What is happening here? Why is it upset with me? Oh, it's REPL lagging. Okay, so then we said if this is true, which means that it did find a number, then we are going to say, okay, it's still valid, right? That sound good? All right, so next we want to do another if statement. So we're going to check now if it contains at least one capital letter. So I'm going to set up my if statement. I'm going to let you guys think of how we can check for if it's a capital letter.
We could actually do the same thing. We could like copy and paste and just
Yeah,
change
there
the.
we go. Now you're thinking like a programmer. We can copy and paste. That is very true. I should have done that when I was writing this the first time. Okay, see, you're smart. All right, so now we want to check instead of it's a number, if it's a capitalized letter. So what could I replace this 0 and 9 with?
A
Busy.
and Z.
Capital A and capitalized Z. So if it is this, then we have another valid password. All right, so now where should this go? I think this one goes here. Confusing with the braces. All right, so now we have one less condition to check. Does it contain at least one special character? So I'm going to say if it's valid, then we're going to want to do something. And that something is checking for a special character. So I have a string called special char, which I've included these random characters, basically me pressing random buttons on my keyboard. And I want to see if the user password contains at least one of them. So how do you guys think I could do this? It's a little bit of a tricky one.
Probably have to look at the ASCII.
We could look at the ASCII, but the thing that I did here is I actually created a string where they're already all here. So we don't need to compare is string dot at I a period, is string dot at I a asterisk, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to do it the shorthand way. And the shorthand way, we're comparing two things. We're comparing a string indices and we're comparing that to another string. We're comparing two strings. We want to check each index if they match. So I think I might want to use a nested for loop for this. I was sure to include one of these for you guys. So the first thing I want to do is basically this for loop again. So I want to do for user password. Nope, not user password. Int I, unsigned I. I need more sleep. Leah, we all need more sleep. I is 0, and then I is less than user password dot size, and then I plus plus. Okay, so now we have a basic for loop, which is going to iterate through every single index of user password. But I also want to iterate through every single index of special char. So I can put another for loop in here. J is starting at 0 because we start at index 0, and we say J is less than special char dot size. And then I could say J plus plus. And now what I want to do is I want to compare if index at if user password at I is equal to special char at j. This is actually going to compare every single character in user password dot user password to every single character in special char. So I'm going to create an if statement. User password dot at I is equivalent to special char dot at j, because j is our variable we're using for special char. Wait, no, it's not. I got this password. User password is using I special char. Oh, wait, I didn't get it backwards.
Yeah, you had it.
I had it. Okay. So then if they are equivalent, well, guess what? We found a match. We found something where the special character is equal to the user password, which means that that character, there was a special character in the user password. So then we could say that valid is true. All right, so I did make one mistake here, and I fixed it for one of them, but not for all of them. The mistake that I made was I never reassigned valid to false for this one, right? Because I got to retest every single time. And the reason being, I assigned valid true here. And then it says, is valid true? Well, yes. And then it's going to do this. But it doesn't matter if it makes it into this if statement, because valid's still true from the last time. So what we got to do is we got to assign valid as false. So it reassesses for valid every single time. Valid is false. And this one. All right. So let's make sure that all compiles, because I have a lot of code. I probably should have compiled it sooner, but it did compile. Okay, that's good. So now we are checking if user password meets the specs. So it did meet the specs. But what happens if it didn't meet the specs? If it doesn't meet the specs, we want to do something. We want to print a message. So if, this should connect to here. So we have an if statement. And if this if results in false, well, guess what? We get a free pass here. We don't have to make any conditions. All we got to do is make an else. So if that whole thing up here is false, if anything up there is false, we can use an else to then print this out, our message saying, hey, please enter a valid password. And here are your specifications. And then it's going to take input for a new password. All right, so let's make sure that compiles. All right, let's enter 2 letters because I don't feel like typing out my whole name right now. Welcome. And then I'm going to enter a password. This should result in false. Please do. But the last thing that we actually want to do is if it does not meet the specs, we want to loop again. So how can we make sure that this actually does loop again? So when they enter their new password here, that we're actually going to test it one more time. Or not just one more time, as many times as it takes for them to enter a valid password. How can we do that? Okay, we can use a do while. We can put a do here, because then this is going to execute no matter what. And then we want to do that while something. What could we do while? What do you think we could put here? So that this executes again while the password is invalid. I probably tested it with valid, because valid is our variable which determines if the password met the specs or not. So I probably said valid and then not valid. Let's put the not where it goes. Not goes here. So while it's not valid, we're going to run it. Let's see. Please tell me I thought of this right. Okay. Invalid password. No, what did I do? Hang on, I'm gonna check my answer, which is why I have it here, because I'm tired and I know you guys gotta go. Maybe forget the else. Not valid. If anyone sees it, please let me know because I am currently a bit stumped on this one. Invalid password. Okay, good. This looks good now. All right, there we go. It's fixed. It's fixed. Okay, so the correct condition was checking if it wasn't valid. I guess we did have to use an if statement rather than an else here, because I guess this one isn't checking for if it's valid, it's checking for if the size is greater than 8. So that's the condition where basically we're saying if the size is not greater or equal to 8, then we're going to do something, but we actually want to check if the password was invalid. So if valid is false, then we want to say invalid password. Then we're going to give them the information to enter a valid password. And then we're going to take input for another password. And then we're going to hit this while. And then if this ran, this is going to run because it's the same condition. And then we're going to go back up to the top and check their password again. So let's double check that everything is still working. Okay. And then let me enter a valid password, which should hopefully work. Please work. Yay, there we go. So the password passed all the tests. It had a special character, it had a number, it was longer than 8 characters, and it did include a capital letter. So that's great. So that is what I have for you guys today. If you want to take a look at any of the REPLs that we went through, if you want to look at our passwords, if you want to look at the debugging problems, you can take them, do them on your own, nested loops, anything of the sort. You can find them all here. Just click on the join link and you can copy it to your own REPL. Yeah, that is what I have for you guys today. Any questions for me? I know that was a bit of a rocky ending, but we got through it, found out what was wrong, and that's about it.
I think that's it. Thank you so much. I
All
appreciate
right,
it.
you're welcome.
You too.
Thanks for joining.